This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today we're going to continue talking about poetry, and we're going to talk about kind of annotating poetry, and then producing topic sentences with templates, and then actually producing a thesis, which sounds weird because that seems to be backwards, but it's not. So you're going to want to check it out. Alright, as we begin our video here today, I want to just actually give a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters for the Garden of English. You can actually see their names up here. So Lindsay and Brian, thank you for that. And in thanking them for that, I want to just point out that if you are interested in actually supporting the Garden of English through Patreon and seeing the different tiers that we offer for different benefits that we give with that, you can actually check out this video here. So I encourage you to do so, and once again, thank you, Brian and Lindsay, for beginning to support and helping the garden continue to grow. But anyway, so today we are going to actually talk about building an essay through annotation and through topic sentences and thesis statements. And I actually, with poetry in particular, I actually have my students do topic sentences first and then their thesis last. Now, that doesn't mean that their thesis actually goes last in their paper, but when it goes through the planning stage, I let them write their topic sentences first, and then we actually put everything into the thesis so that everything works for a line of reasoning. So we are continuing to look at Ozymandias, and I have a couple other videos about that you can also access up here. So you're going to check out that playlist. I had a great video where we talked about annotating and reading poetry with my friend Gina, and there's a video about breaking down the prompt, and we want to make sure that we look at those things. But anyway, what we want to do for this today is we want to just talk about reading and things like that. Now, I'm not going to go through my whole annotation spiel, okay, but I am going to quickly touch upon things. Just like I do in AP Lang, in AP Lit, what I do is I have kids annotate down both sides of a poem. And one side of the poem in AP Lit is going to actually be a little bit more treasure huntish than I typically am comfortable with, but I'll explain why in a minute. And down the right-hand side, it's going to be all about understanding. And the reason why is because if I talk about lit terms down the left-hand side and I talk about understanding down the right-hand side, I then set up topic sentences with the evidence right in the middle. And so now students will be able to realize, hey, these are my topic sentences, this is my evidence, and now I just have to correlate everything. So I do have this document found in the description right down below. These are rules for reading poetry, or even I do the same thing with fiction as well. But I would like to point out that this document down there is not dogma, first of all, and second of all, it explains everything that I do. I'm not going to go through the whole process like I said. But I would like to just tell you that when I actually have kids annotate, whether it's prose or poetry, I typically stick with the literary elements that are listed on this list. So they're going to go down the left-hand side of the poem, and they are going to label for these plot elements just in general, because these are quick annotations. They're reading quickly. They need to jot down little things. And these literary elements that I have here are actually all pulled from the course and exam description. So because of that, what I know that they're doing is if they look at these things and they find them in their poetry or their prose or whatever, and they label it down the left-hand side, they're actually practicing the literary vocabulary that they need to have for the exam itself. And I did add a couple bits of language on here, but I took almost all of them from the course and exam description. So what I'm going to do while I read my poem is I'm going to annotate down the left-hand side just for literary elements, okay? Now, because we're talking about a poem, there are some poetic elements as well, like caesura and enjambment and things like that, and maybe even commenting on poetic structure if it's a sonnet or something. Students can annotate that too, but I typically just say account for that at the end, but just don't ignore that it's actually there. And they know, my students will know to do that with poetry in particular. But anyway, down the right-hand side of what we're going to do, we're going to actually say, okay, based on my understanding of this lit device that's on this side, I'm going to then have my questions have my students ask the question, okay, if I look at the setting that I annotated here, what can I now understand about the conflict, other elements of the plot, the mood, the characterization of a character, or a universal idea or insight? And we can even throw tone in there as well. And that's what they're going to label on the right-hand side. So we have a lit element on one side, we have an understanding on the other side, and boom, we have topic sentences with the evidence in the middle. And so this right here talks about all of that. And I also have my kids write universal insight statements after they read poetry. If you want assistance with that, you can just check this out here. Once again, that document is in the description. But we've got our poem Ozymandias, and I'm just going to show you what I did here in labeling this out. And I'm going to show you a couple things that I didn't put in the left-hand column, but I still want to account for. So you're going to notice that on the left-hand side, I've got literary elements. On the right-hand side, I have understandings. And this is the question that we want kids to ask. We don't want the kids to ask, what should I understand because of this? I want to have, what does this, I shouldn't say test, it should say text. Let's fix that. It should be, what does this text that I'm noticing right here allow me to understand about plot, conflict, tone, mood, characterization, or universal ideas or insights. And for those of you that teach that as theme, that's what that means. Now, the reason why it's very important that we don't just say, what do I understand? We say, what do I understand about any of these things? Is because now we're giving students, right, or we're giving you, if you're a student, right, the ability to make sure that you connect your understanding to something else in the plot or in the poem or text itself. It's not just what do you understand. You might say, I understand now that I don't understand this, right? No. What do you understand about, tie it to one of these things, or maybe more than one of these things, okay? So as we look at Ozymandias, you'll notice that we've got the poem here, and I'm not going to read the whole poem, but I am, maybe I will. I don't know. It depends on how I feel in just a couple seconds. But I want to just point out what I did here. You're going to notice that I have the first two lines, right? I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. So now I've got my, first element, my first kind of set here, and you'll notice that I just wrote the word setting here. That's it. I put setting. And then I said to myself, okay, with that setting of the antique land and the desert and the sand and whatnot, what are my understandings about mood or about anything? And I asked that question, and I was like, okay, the fact that it says antique land as the setting here brings up this kind of like archaic, like push to the past. And sure enough, you'll notice that the speaker actually says, I met. And that brings us to the past as well. So we're in the present, but now we're reflecting on the past. That's key, because in this poem, we are talking about how the past and the present kind of interrelate. Like there's that kind of time change here. And that's part of one of the universal insights of the poem, like how things change over time. So sure enough, right, I've got setting. It brings up this kind of like archaic atmosphere. And then I also have setting a couple lines down where it talks about being in the desert full of sand. And what's really important here is that we have a barren landscape, okay? So we know that there's a sculpture. We also know that the sculpture is broken because of the images here. It's trunkless legs of stone. It's broken. And we want to think about these things and say, what can I understand here? So when I get this image, I'm like, okay, what do I understand about something going on in the poem? All right, it's broken. But I also notice that we have a first-person point of view, and then it shifts to a first-person frame narrative, and frame narratives always separate. So now I've got a structure that's broken, and I've got a narrative that's broken. And that right there, I'm like, okay, so what does this frame narrative and this separation allow me to understand? That there is something separated here and broken here. And the setting and imagery helps me with that as well. And when I look at the setting and the image here, I've got the sculpture being broken. What do I understand? Oh, there's a sculpture that's broken, and it's in the middle of a barren landscape. This is my understanding here when I look at the setting and the images. So if I keep continuing here, you're going to notice that it says, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. And now I talk about the imagery that's here that actually relates to characterization. And I say those images that are there speak of somebody who's cold-spirited, authoritative, and it also reminds me, though, that the face is kind of broken off of the structure itself. So we still have that idea of that kind of brokenness, right? Next, though, I see a big shift. So I do note, if you notice here, I am going to mark my shifts, and I actually try to say if it's a shift of contrast or a shift of point of view or things like that. And this shift actually relates directly to characterization. Why? Because it says, tell that it's Sculptor. So now we're shifting from the image itself to the sculptor of the image, who's not even actually there, who's not even represented, tells that it's Sculptor. well those passions red, which yet survive. And now this right here, what do I understand about the sculptor because of this? The sculptor is mentioned with positive connotations, well those passioned red, and the sculptor's work still survives. And so now we see a contrast here between the sculptor and whoever was being represented in this statue. And that's really important because the only positive connotations here are with that kind of art and sculptor. And I know that the art suggests that the ruler is cold, spirited, and authoritative, but it's lasted. And that's the key point here, which yet survive, well those passions red. So the sculptor had the ability to really pull out this message about who this ruler was. Okay, and then sure enough, stamped on these lifeless things. So the life is not in the rock or the ruin itself. It's in what the sculptor could convey in that face, right? Oh, here's the emotion, right? And then it says, the hand that mocked them, the heart that fed. And we have another shift. And on that pedestal, so now we're shifting from the ruins themselves to focusing on the pedestal. It says, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. And this right here is another shift in what Ozymandias actually says. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. And we see his arrogance. We see his tyrannical nature. He's like, yes, if you look on me, you should be afraid. Doesn't sound very welcoming here. And this is what I'm actually putting here on the right-hand side. So I'm looking at what I say for characterization for the sculptor up here, and I'm like, wow, what do I understand? The sculptor's work has lasted. When I look at the idea that the sculpture has survived, once again, I see the universal ideas here of art and survival. And I'm like, oh, what is being said about this, right? We then have some characterization in here. And with our shift, when it focuses to the pedestal, we see the characterization of Ozymandias being an arrogant tyrant, okay? And then that comes up with this language. And then we see another shift because it comes right back, right, to the story where he looks nothing beside remains, right? And now it's almost like we're back in the present. And then it says, round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone level sands stretch far away. So we are more in the present tense now as this kind of story is being told. And so I talk about the shift. We're back from what Ozymandias had said into the present when the speaker, the secondary speaker, is telling the story. And it gives us some setting and some images. And the setting is this kind of barren element. It's decay. It's a wreck. And I link that directly to the ideas, right, of desolation and time. And what do I understand? I understand that the statue is hardly standing right now, and there's certainly no kingdom that's surrounding it. So we see the kind of contrast here between this ruler that's like, hey, look at all that I have. And when you actually look around this monument, you see him broken, and you see nothing to show for it. But the artist still has something to show all of these years later. It might be broken, but it's still there, and it can convey the character of that leader with a surety. And so that's really what we're looking at here in relation to what's going on. So you'll just notice I put my understandings down the right-hand side. I just listed my literary elements on the left-hand side. Now, you will also notice in here, though, just real quickly, that I have a darker purple here. That's because those are elements of caesura, which also mimics this idea of brokenness, which I would probably write about in my commentary if I wanted to. I also want to recognize that there is some enjambment here where there's no punctuation at the end of the line. Enjambment, so caesura is always meant to slow down, and you want to ask the question, why am I supposed to slow down here? And caesura is when there's punctuation in the middle of poetic lines. Enjambment is when there's a lack of punctuation, particularly at the end of poetic lines. That's typically meant to speed up, and I want to say, okay, why am I supposed to slow down here? Why am I supposed to speed up here? Because I should be able to provide commentary on that if I notice it. And so I would have my students actually try to answer those questions as well and put those questions down the right-hand side. But this is just a little mock-up of how I actually set up annotations, because it sets up everything that I'm going to do in my topic sentences. One other thing, because this is poetry, right? We want to remember that good poets give a shift, or shift happens, or whatever you want to say. Maybe I'll make a shirt that says that, and maybe I'll do a poster as well that has, ways to look for shift. But I will actually ask that students identify shifts, right? And here are the shifts that show up in the poem. It goes from one first-person speaker to another first-person speaker. It goes from the present to the past, and then it goes from the past back to the present. And then we've got contrasts. We see the contrast of the artist and the ruler. We see the contrast of the survival of the art with the non-survival of the kingdom. And then we also see the contrast between art and authority, and ultimately their ability to survive over time. Which one lasts, which one doesn't, okay? So anyway, after I've thought about all of these things here, I am actually going to produce topic sentences. Now I've got topic sentence stems, and these stems are meant to help kids work all the way through a poem. And the last stem, number 4, is actually able to work as the conclusion for the poem. You don't have to write a secondary conclusion after this. So let's look at these stems, and we'll just look at the understandings that I pulled in and all I did was take my notes from up here and just put the ideas into the stems. So stem 1 is author or speaker begins by summarize the impactful element as seen in the text, suggesting that, and then what's implied by the text. What's the understanding that comes? That's what this actually says. So let's see what I did here. I have Shelley begins by immediately producing a reflective first-person frame narrative. So notice that goes right with my note about the frame narrative. There we go. Okay. And including multiple instances of caesura, so I'm commenting on that, suggesting that the fractured structure of the sonnet mirrors the present state of the monument the traveler is reflecting upon. So now what I'm doing here is I'm talking about the structure of the narrative and the structure of the poetic lines, and I'm comparing that to the structure itself that's together but crumbled. And so that right there is going to be my first body paragraph. I'm going to talk about how those structural elements mimic what's actually going on in the poem itself. So then I move to my next one. The speaker or author then shifts to summarize the element as seen in the text, showcasing that, and then what's the understanding that comes from there. Now you're going to notice that I have the speaker then shifts to. Now, I went from Shelley to the speaker, and the reason why is because here I talk about how Shelley sets up the first person frame narrative with the speakers. So now I can actually move to the speaker here, okay? And so because of that, the speaker is the one who might not be Shelley, right? The speaker and the poet are not always the same, right? The speaker is the one that is then narrating, so that speaker is going to be shifting. So that's why I changed the language a little bit. If you put Shelley there, is it okay? Yes, but it's not entirely accurate. So topic sentence 2 says, the speaker then shifts to, and all I did was look at the contrast that I saw in the middle here, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk about that. And I'm going to fill this in. So I said, contrasting the negative attributes of the ruler with the power of the artist, showcasing, and what was my understanding there? Showcasing that though the tyrant may have had authority at one point in history, the artist's power to convey his message has lasted longer. And that's my understanding. Now you're going to notice that these understandings are in the text, okay? I'm talking about the tyrant that shows up in the text. I'm talking about the artist that shows up in the text. If you even go back to here, I'm talking about the sonnet, and I'm talking about the structure in the text. I'm talking about that monument in the text. So please note, I'm not fully universal yet when talking about my poem, okay? So then I go to number 3 where it says the speaker or author then follows this with/by. So pick one of the two, with or by. And if you want to know what verbs come after these ideas of with or by, and if you want to actually know like why there's an asterisk here, it's because you can use multiple verbs here. These are just the ones that are my go-to. In fact, I've got a verbs for literary analysis poster right here. And if kids are looking at setting, they might want to say, okay, the author describes this in the setting, or the poet, or the speaker, or whatever. So if they could pick out the literary term on the left-hand side that they've already annotated, they've got a nice little verb list to kind of pull those verbs of what the speaker is doing. By the way, for one of our Patreon tiers, you can actually get that verb poster for free. So you might want to consider checking that out if this is something that's of interest to you. But we also do sell these poster file for free. But we do sell these posters and poster files as well. The links for that are in the description. Anyway, back to here. Okay, we move on to our third one, and I say, okay, what's my next shift? And that's when the speaker, right? If I go up here, I'm like, okay, hey, there's a shift here. The speaker is arrogant and tyrannical, and it's a shift to the speaker's. To Ozymandias' words, and that shift right, is important to me. So I put the speaker then follows this by recounting a boastful claim, and then I have revealing that the tyrannical figure that the shattered monument once represented embraced his tyrannical nature and was viciously boastful. So forgive me for botching how I read that sentence, right? But it's supposed to say, revealing that the tyrannical figure that the shattered monument once represented embraced his tyrannical nature and was viciously boastful. So this is a characterization, right? If you wanted to, if you didn't want to use my stem, you could very easily say the speaker then follows this by recounting a boastful claim, highlighting how or characterizing the tyrannical figure as embracing that element of his character. You could easily have worded it that way too. But like I said, these are just stems that are meant to help you. And then finally, we have our last stem, and this is the one where we start getting universal, where we pull it out of our understandings out of the text to make it universal. And that's why this will be our conclusion. We have the speaker or author concludes by, and we're going to keep it with the speaker here because the speaker is telling the story. We're going to say the speaker or author concludes by contrasting, and then it says summarize an impactful element seen at the beginning of the text with summarize an impactful element at the end of the text, illustrating that, and then you're going to put a universal insight in there. And that is a thematic statement that's universal, that goes outside of the text. So now, here's where I'm going to actually look at my notes and say, okay, this is about art and survival and time and desolation and destruction. I should see that here. Oh, and about power, too. So we have, the speaker concludes by contrasting the bold claims and images tied to the broken statue. So that's the first kind of stuff that we see, with, and now we're going to go to the very end, what's at the end, with the desolate land surrounding the ancient ruins, illustrating that only art has the power to overcome the inevitable destruction that comes at the hands of time. And now what we're looking at here is that universal message. And I take the images of the poem to actually convey that. And so now I've got 4 topic sentences, right? This last one will be for a conclusion, and this is my actual paper. This is what I'm going to write about. This is my whole essay. Now, I write my thesis last only because although it's going to be the beginning thing that someone sees, all I need to do now is go in here and just reword my literary elements and my understandings and put it into this format. In the genre title, author's name, presents, or you can use any other literary verb, once again, consult the chart, presents these things happening in the text in order to, reveal understandings of these things in the text, which ultimately illustrates, and then you have a universal insight there, or a thematic statement. So what does this look if I just pull everything down but use synonyms from my topic sentences? It looks like this. In the sonnet, Ozymandias, Percy Bysshe Shelley develops a frame narrative, contrasts the work of a tyrant with the work of an artist, and highlights a boastful yet presently unsupported claim, ultimately illustrating that though kingdoms may fall at the hands of time, the communicative power of an artist's creative talents will not. That, folks, is a strong, strong thesis. And now what will happen is when I want to write my paper, this is going to go first, and then I will follow it by writing these body paragraphs here to ultimately get a strong, strong poetic analysis here. And that's really how it works. So I am going to always remind you that the easiest thing you could do to help the Garden of English, especially if this video helped you, is to click like and subscribe. We are active on Facebook and Instagram and kind of TikTok, but I'm still on the fence about it. We might be, I don't know, maybe it's not for me. We're still trying to figure it out. But at least Facebook and Instagram, you can follow us there. You can like us there. We have a bunch of affiliate links in our descriptions down below. That also helps support the Garden of English by checking those out. And honestly, we have another conclusion video to do for this Ozymandias piece. We'll try to get that done within the next few weeks. And I look forward to seeing you at those times, right? And I look forward to producing those videos. So I hope you all have a great day.